The question I think that is really important, and as I listened to people over the past day and a half, I think it's worth our time to get a little more into the weeds and talk about the how. How do we go about this? And I love listening to Ben because I think our design process is pretty similar to the way they develop software. So we start by empathizing. So when we get school teams together, I am so privileged because I get to bring principals and teachers together to work in design communities. And so what we start with when they come together is we want them to empathize with their students. They choose a student and they say, what works for this student? What's challenging for this student? And how can we use blended models to help this student? By deeply empathizing and thinking about that student experience, it grounds us well as we start to design blended models for our students. The next piece we've got to do is we've got to define the problem. And I think that's one of the issues that we run into as I listen to folks talk about digital content sitting on the shelf. Because here's a good example. So as they work to define problems, a great problem of practice that a school came up with, they have a lot of needy students. And when they come into the middle level, those students who are really struggling tend to move up quite quickly. But the students who come into their school in 6th grade who are the top performers had a tendency to slide as they went through their system. And so their problem of practice was, how do we provide complex text to our highest performing readers so that we continue to differentiate and push for them as well? That really drove our work very consciously and made digital content really easy to choose. Now, I'm not speaking for Achieve 3000, but that was a tool that was directly aligned to what their challenge was. And of course, Achieve helps students as well who are struggling readers because it lexiles it automatically for students at every single reading level. So they get to read the same article, but they could be reading 10 different versions tailored to their current reading level. And so it's pretty amazing when we're really thoughtful about this. And once they start thinking in those terms and they have that problem of practice, we start to ideate, or they start actually drawing out their classroom and what it's going to look like. We then pull that together to create a prototype and bring it back to them. So these prototypes become our work. So the blended learning team, including myself and our coaches, this tells us we're now going to train them on Achieve 3000 or iReady in this case. We're going to have to help support them and set up the systems and routines that they want to implement in their classroom. And when we take this approach, it's very much a collaborative effort, and they don't feel like digital content is being forced on them. We're helping them solve a problem that they identified. So the last piece of this, which is incredibly important, is the test is when that hits our end user and is implemented into our classrooms. And so once it goes into our classrooms, now it's time teachers work on the implementation process, and then about this time of year, we go back to those classrooms and we do what we call an iteration meeting. So we go through, we bring the teachers back together, and we say, hey, what's going well? What are you struggling with? And then we iterate to get to the next level to improve and tighten up their implementations. Now, a lot of people ask me this, and this is a pretty good challenge. People are like, gosh, it seems like the sky's the limit when you go to design. Well, I think it's important for us in education. I think other industries do this quite well, where they think about this tight, loose construct. And for us, what we're really loose about, we don't care if teachers choose a flex model or a station rotation or a flipped classroom. They get to choose whatever makes the most sense for them to meet their students' needs. What we care about are these 4 things. These are the things we're really tight about within our implementations. And these things, we could take away all the digital content, we could take away the computers, and these would still be incredibly powerful educational tools. So we talk to teachers who have no technology in their classrooms about these 4 key elements. I mean, this is Hattie effect size stuff, right, folks? These are deep buckets of what quality instruction looks like. So when we think about tight feedback loops, if students are getting immediate feedback on their work, we know they can progress faster. If students are in the driver's seat and have some level of ownership where they can push ahead at their pace when they're ready, we know they're going to be more invested in their education and they're going to learn more, particularly when they reflect on what they know and what they don't know. We also know, like I talked about earlier, when teachers can be much more targeted in the instruction they provide in small group, it's a really powerful combination, especially for our language learners, where they also have the opportunity to practice and use academic language as they create amazing collaborative projects. Now, those things are all well and good, but we've got to be a little more clear with folks. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is we talk at a really high level, and then teachers are like, wow, trying to implement this in my classroom, the gap is huge. And so we've tried to close that gap with what we call our innovation configuration. And the innovation configuration, it's kind of like a rubric, but really it's a self-reflection tool. And what it does for teachers is it says, how can I just dip my toe in the water and start doing things to provide more ownership for students? All the way up to really advanced practices that we call systematizing, where now students are leading the way and they're having one-on-one conferences with their teacher at the end of the week, and they're goal setting and co-creating with their teacher and student. So these are just different ways to move along that gives teachers a really concrete pathway of how to move forward in their implementations. And this is what we coach on. Sometimes it's helpful to step outside of the academic world, I think, to really think about the power. Because the reality is, in athletics, they would never take away digital tools and technology to help them with their training. Now, this is a picture of my son who's 12 years old. He is a competitive golfer, and he absolutely loves it. And you can see he's also a daredevil, because if you look at all that sand in front of him and all the green to the right, he's going straight over the sand. Meanwhile, Dad with the camera saying, will you please hit it towards just the green, it's wide open, right? But like every athlete or every golfer, he's got a challenge. So we live in Colorado, which isn't the best weather in the world, right? And he goes here and he competes, and believe it or not, the kids who usually do the best are from Texas, California, Florida, right? They've got 12 months where they can play golf. And so Trey, as he's working, and we're continuing to refine, he has this challenge where he pulls his club on the inside. And when he does that, the ball either goes dead right or a snap hook to the left. And so we kept trying to think about, how do I help him and get better, right? And so if you go to Greeley, you'd see Dad, Deagan, sitting there in a chair behind my son, watching him as his coach had taught him, hey, you got to take it straight back. So I sat behind him, and I'd watch him. And I'd say, hey, Trey, a little bit inside. That was straight back. Believe it or not, that got really irritating after a while. Right? Shocking, right? He got really irritated with Dad back there blabbing. And so it was interesting. So then I got smarter, and I pulled out my iPhone. And I'd sit there and I'd record him and say, hey, Trey, I want you to look at something. Well, very quickly the gig was up. Trey's like, I know, Dad, I pulled it inside, right? Well, then the snow started to fly in Colorado. And we started thinking about this about 2 years ago, and he has a tournament in February in Phoenix. And how are we going to get prepared? So the snow started flying, so we thought, okay, we'll go to a simulator. It's not as good, it's not real grass, it's got issues. But when we got there, an amazing thing happened. So all of these digital tools provide him with amazing analytics. All of a sudden, he could see his ball speed. He could see the peak of the ball flight. He could see how much spin. He got a line that told him where it went. He got more feedback than he was getting out on the driving range. And it was really targeted. And the coolest thing about it is, it told him the path of his swing. Straight back or inside. And the crazy thing about it? He didn't argue with the digital tool. And he didn't get irritated with it either, right? For some reason, that non-judgmental feedback was exactly what he needed, and it also put him in the driver's seat, where Dad could now step aside and let him get the feedback and continue to work. So I put this in front of you because here's what I really think about all the time, is I don't have I'm an educator like all of you. And he's competing against kids who have private coaches, mental coaches, all this other stuff, right? But what the thing about it is by using a blended model, we've been able to actually close the gap with those folks. And so by putting this digital tool in his hand, what's funny is now in the middle of the summer, he will go to a lesson with his coach, and then he'll say, let's go practice in the simulator, even though it's 85 degrees and beautiful. And the coolest thing about it is now I get to save money, because when we go in to the simulator, my son, after he's done with the practice session, I get to press this magic button. And what it does is it pulls up an Excel spreadsheet with all of that data that was gathered while he was swinging the club. And I hit email and it goes to his coach. So I used to pay $60 for an hour of instruction for my son. Now his coach gets all that data. And now he knows exactly the targeted instruction he's going to give my son. And so now he only uses it for 30 minutes, his coach time. And so what I'd like to say as well is, digital content does a great job at the low-level stuff like many folks have said. But what I want folks to think about and maybe understand is, what this allows is for the teacher to engage in those highest valued engagement with students. I really appreciate your time. I thank you for this opportunity. And let's please, as we walk away, let's continue this conversation to make a difference for kids.